Welcome to Intentional Divorce Insights. I'm Leah Hadley, certified divorce financial analyst, accredited financial counselor, and the founder of Intentional Divorce Solutions. I'll be your guide through the complexities of divorce, finance, and emotional wellness. Join me as we uncover practical tips and empowering insights to help you navigate your divorce with clarity and intention. Hi there, and welcome back to Intentional Divorce Insights. We're covering an important topic today, and I know many of you do have children with special needs. And when you are going through a divorce, that can make things a little bit more complicated. And we have a specialist here today. It's my pleasure to welcome Mary Ann Hughes, who is a thought leader in the field of special needs divorce. And she started Special Family Transitions to help parents navigate the overwhelm and complexities of divorce involving a child with a disability. As a certified special needs divorce coach, mediator, and parenting coordinator, Mary Ann's mission is to help parents consider and advocate for the special needs of their children while reducing the time, stress, and expense involved in divorce and co-parenting challenges. Welcome, Mary Ann. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Leah. Pleasure to be here today.
Awesome. Mary Ann, I'm just so curious, what inspired you to start Special Family Transitions? How did you get into this work?
Right. So I'm a mom of two now young adult children on opposite ends of the autism spectrum. And several years ago, I had to go through divorce and didn't really know how to approach that or how to advocate for my kids or what I needed to do to make sure that we all got a good result as part of the process. And so I eventually got there, found experts I needed to connect with to help me through my process, but decided that the time, money, and effort that I spent really shouldn't have to be something that all families go through, considering the high rate of divorce with special needs children. And so that's why I decided to form Special Family Transitions, become a certified divorce coach, specializing in special needs families. And that's what I'm honored to do now, is support families navigate the overwhelm and complexities that are involved in the process, so it can be done in an intentional way.
Fantastic. I love it when people start their work out of their own personal experience. It just adds this whole other layer of empathy that people who just haven't been there, it's just hard, and especially dealing with divorce is difficult in and of itself. But when you involve children with special needs, there are some additional complexities. And I'm curious to hear from you, what do you see as different in a divorce with a child with a disability versus without?
Sure. So the biggest factor for me in terms of my kids and getting us all through the divorce was what was going to happen to my kids and how it would be supported in the future as they were becoming adults and beyond that as well. So a lot of times divorce, they only think about up until age 18. And then after that, it becomes something they think about in the future. But for me, I spent a lot of time and energy trying to make sure that my children's needs going forward would be met and discussed as part of the divorce discussions and agreements.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've heard you in the past talk about focusing on the approach to divorce as with a business mindset instead of, making those emotionally based decisions. Why is that so important, especially when there is a child with special needs involved?
Yeah, so I come from a business background. I've got an MBA, so I kind of have that way of thinking anyway. And so my former spouse used to joke that I always had to have a project. Well, this became my project in terms of getting through the divorce and figure out what we had to do and what the cost would be in terms of my kids. And I know you being a financial person, that becomes a top priority for a lot of families. And that really is one of the biggest stressors, is how are we going to make it? How are my kids going to make it for what they need to reach their full potential? And so there's a lot of things you want to do as well in terms of how the kids, whatever age they might be, how they're going to deal with the transitions as well and the emotional aspects to the kids, but also as the parent going through it. Sometimes we're so overwhelmed by the emotion, we're not really making clear, good decisions for our future. And so that's one of my roles, is to help people go, like you said, from emotional divorce to thinking about it as a business and financial and legal transaction. Kind of sounds harsh to say and hard to hear sometimes, but really at the end of the day, we're trying to come to agreement on maybe one of the biggest business deals of your life, trying to figure out who gets what and how we're going to plan for the future. And so it's important to come at that in a way that considers what the impact will be to you and your kids going forward.
Yeah, it is so important. And there is a lot of emotion when it comes to talking about your children, and especially if you're feeling like your children are especially vulnerable, right? I know I've had some very difficult mediations where one of the parents was really committed to a particular diagnosis and providing the support that the child needed based on that diagnosis, and the other one just didn't buy into the diagnosis at all. And so that's a very difficult conversation when we're not even on the same playing field in terms of, what the parental expectations are and what kind of support's needed and all of that. Do you find that at all when you're working with people?
I find that a lot. I think it's very common that both parents are not on the same page in terms of the child's disability and the impact it will have on their future. So part of it is the grief cycle. Maybe each parent is processing the diagnosis and that child's abilities and plans for the future in a different way. It could be that maybe one parent sees one side of what the child can do, whereas another parent, maybe who's involved in a different way, doesn't see those moments where the child is struggling or having difficulty and having behavior issues. Maybe they're seeing a different side of that child. And so maybe for that reason, they may not be on the
Sure.
same page. So I would say before you get into mediation, this is something that that was important to me in my process, as well as I advise other people, is try to get on the same page or at least share information beforehand, before you're in a situation where you're having to uh, have a conflict about the diagnosis. Try to come and share ahead of time, if you can, maybe doctors' reports, therapists, different people who are supporting that child, to be able to share, okay, this is a child's diagnosis and this is what they need, and maybe these are the kind of programs that can help our child to be the best they can. So nobody wants anything bad for their child. We all want the best, but I say plan for the worst, but hope for the best, but plan for the worst. So meaning we want our child to be as independent as we can, but how do we get there? We have to maybe put safeguards and plans in place, and that may include additional child support. It may include extra provisions or different kind of parenting plan to protect that child and build up their ability to be as independent as they can in the future.
Yeah. And you mentioned maybe a different kind of parenting plan. I certainly find that to be true. In some cases, having the flexibility and the structure in place to make adjustments to that parenting plan, right? Especially if you are divorcing and your children are still young. And quite frankly, you don't know what they're going to need, right? Their needs can evolve over time. And so having the flexibility within that plan to be able to meet those needs becomes so important. But what do you see in terms of the parenting plans for families with special needs? Like, are you seeing anything in specific that you want to make sure gets included or not included, things like that?
Sure. And so, as you mentioned, depending on the child's challenges, and for instance, if they're neurodiverse in some way, predictability and consistency is important to someone like that. And so, you don't want to have perhaps a lot of changes back and forth between homes. You want to have as consistent a schedule as you can, so the child has less anxiety and can know what to expect when they're going to be with mom, when they're going to be with dad. And hopefully, within that time, they have access to each parent, and there's hopefully good communication between parents. But we definitely want to promote as positive and loving environment as we can, and that for the child can know, okay, I'm with mom coming up, these days, and dad these days, or I have access to both. I think makes a big difference. And so yeah, things like that, and getting even the school involved and therapists involved to understand that they're part of the team supporting that child and that family as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a team and you've mentioned some different professionals who might be involved with the process. Talk to us a little bit about some of the team members that you work with.
Sure. So first, you want to have an attorney, family law attorney, who has experience working with special needs cases. So there's so many complexities that have to be addressed so that the child maintains their eligibility for benefits, government benefits now and potentially in the future. And so
Sure.
that involves not just a family law attorney, but also an estate planning attorney. So they can help you develop and draft the first and third party special needs trusts. And then you also want, and also you said planning for the future. So maybe you consider guardianship in part of your initial discussions as to what that might look like in the future, because that's something that you're going to have to, even the child is young, is something that may be a factor and something you want to consider. So you want to start having those discussions about thinking about the long term, what might that look like? Also, you want to involve a special needs financial planner who has experience with that, maybe helping you come to good numbers in terms of negotiation in your mediations and other discussions you would have about what are the programs out there, what do they cost, and what are the monies that may be coming in for government programs, for instance, which aren't assured. So I want people to rely on that, but we want to look at what the costs are now as well as what they might be as you're coming up with support and ways to address those child's needs, whether they're financial needs or other needs as well. And then, of course, having a mental health professional can be helpful as well for the parent and for the child, as well as possibly being an expert, as we mentioned earlier, about showing where the challenges are for the child and what will be in their benefit to continue in terms of supports and the things that they may need throughout the process and from each parent.
Yeah. And where does the divorce coach fit into all of that?
And of course, yeah, so as a divorce coach, we're there kind of helping somebody throughout the whole process. So we can help connect you with resources, help you manage your emotions, and plan for the future. So I mentioned about the project plan. So divorce can be overwhelming and can be all-consuming. And so I tried to help my clients break things down, maybe one step at a time, understand what their goals are and priorities are in the divorce, and have them think about the long term. Like you said, sometimes we're just focused on getting through that divorce and that mediation, but we're not thinking about what's going to happen afterwards. So I try to get people to think about divorce as a finite process, and then also plan about what's life going to be after divorce in terms of how do you want to show up, the example we want to have there for our kids and for others that we're working with in the process and afterwards, because this is your opportunity to really present your child's needs in a way that all parties can understand. And so we want to look back on this time as one that we're proud of and how we handled ourselves, how we communicated our needs and those of our children, because we're our children's biggest advocate. And as a mom of a child with special needs, we're very involved in their daily lives, especially in the educational system. And so I would encourage people to take that same approach in a divorce. So you're advocating for your child when maybe your child is not verbal or they need that support from others to help with what they need in the future, whether it's educational plan or future plans for what's to come.
Mary Ann, what do you see as some of the most common conflicts that arise with some of these cases, and how have you seen them resolved?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, sometimes people are not on the same page about the
Yeah.
disability. That becomes a driving factor. And some of that, we talked about can be for different reasons, emotionally, or maybe someone there is not accepting, but sometimes financially driven, because some people may have been advised by different members of their team that if they maybe dispute the diagnosis or say that it's maybe not as severe, then maybe they won't have to pay as much child support, or maybe for a longer duration. So, for example, depending on where you are, and this is specific to each state has their own laws, but in Texas, where I am, for instance, you can have indefinite child support and above guideline child support. And so that becomes a point of discussion and a point of conflict, because then people are going to want to maybe downplay some of the needs so that the support
Right.
maybe looks different.
Right. Yeah, and I do think, especially when you're dealing with young children, you just sometimes don't know the kind of support that they're going to need, right, in the future.
That's right. And so the good thing is you can always go back and modify. So if a child is young, perhaps the diagnosis has not yet been made available, or become apparent. And maybe you have another child that maybe is not diagnosed at the time you're getting divorced, and maybe uh, they see some traits later on. And so you can always go back and modify and discuss things. And so I would say if you can come to agreement that the child has a disability, at least state that in the paperwork so that later, if you have to go back and modify and make some adjustments, then at least it's there as a reference point. So the judges are, from my experience and what I've heard, are more willing to support that as opposed to never having been mentioned in the paperwork at all.
Yeah. And I want to circle back to, you were talking about the team approach and the various professionals that can really support a family. I know a lot of people, when they hear about all these different professionals, get very overwhelmed by the thought of having to pay for all of these people, because quite frankly, all these professionals, add up over time. But I would just reiterate, one of the things that I heard Mary Ann saying was working with professionals who have experience specifically with families with children with special needs. So even if you can't surround yourself with the entire team, at least having somebody like Mary Ann on your side who has a wealth of resources that she's able to share, can really allow you to fill in some of those gaps, even if you can't have that whole team in place. So I just want to encourage people, one of the things that people often say is that, sometimes when somebody specializes in a particular area, that they cost more, right? But Mary Ann knows so much more about the resources available for families with children with special needs than I do, that it actually would take her a lot less time to be able to give you that information and provide those resources. Whereas I would be doing a significant amount of research. So the time it would take would be, well, I'd probably just call Mary Ann, to be honest. But you get what I'm saying.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a great question, because people do, have those questions and concerns. And I can tell you, when I went through it, I didn't have a divorce coach. I didn't know there were divorce coaches back
Right.
then. And if I had had one, it probably could have cut my the time and the money I spent on my divorce probably in half, because I went through a lot of things to my lawyer, perhaps, that maybe would have been best addressed by a divorce coach or someone that had the information, or even with a mental health professional to kind of deal with the other issues, the emotional side that we were talking about, that tends to maybe sometimes overtake the time and our energy in divorce. And so as a coach, I tell, try to get people keep them as focused as they can be on what needs to be done, and bringing it back to that, as opposed to thinking about this or what happened in the past, or what do we need to worry about in the future. We want to focus on the task at hand, what we need to get done by certain times to be able to get through the process in the best and efficient way possible, for sure. So I find, as I mentioned, there are things that will come back and have a negative consequence if we don't take care of them correctly. For instance,
Sure.
that's why we want to have the estate planning people and the trust in place, because if your child does end up getting being eligible to get benefits, those, you may not get the full amount of benefits. You may not get the benefits, or they can be taken away because you haven't done things in the proper way, and then that ends up costing you more, and is a risk to that child in terms of the money they could have received, and then it costs money to go back and fix it later. So you want to try to do it right the first time if you can. It may be a little bit of investment up front, but it's going to have a lot of savings later for you. But definitely, I agree that it's going to cost you more potentially if you don't have experts involved.
Right. Oh, so many important points there. Mary Ann, you were sharing a resource with me before we got started recording. Could you share that with our audience? I'm sure people would love to know about it.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, I didn't know that there were resources out there as we're talking about today. And so I found it hard, even though I had great people that I was connected with in my community. A lot of them didn't have special needs experience. It was really hard for me to find a financial person and planner who could help me and help me do like a life care plan and things like that. So to be points of discussion. And so a colleague of mine, another certified divorce coach who does also the special needs work, Susan Bernstein, and I put together a website called Divorce for Special Needs Children. And in that, we're sharing different resources that we wish we had when we were going through divorce to help us before, during, and after divorce, supporting us and our children who have a disability. And so there we have mediators, financial planners, mental health professionals, everybody that you could use in your divorce. We're there trying to collect, so have them join us as our trusted members, people that we've vetted and that we trust, so that we can share them with others. And so if you're a professional listening to this and have experience in this field, we'd love to have you join us in that. And if you're a parent going through it, check it out and see what they have to offer and what kind of support you might need. A lot of them do work across the country, so we can do things virtually as well.
Fantastic. And what was that website again?
It's divorceforspecialneedschildren.com.
Perfect. And I will include that in the show notes as well. So if you are listening to this, you'll be able to just click on that and go check that out. I just think that's such a fantastic resource. And Mary Ann also contributed a chapter to a book and has generously offered to give our listeners a copy of that chapter. Mary Ann, how can people access that?
Yeah, so the best ways is to email me at maryann@specialfamilytransitions.com, and then to find my resources. My website is specialfamilytransitions.com, and all my social media is under that name as well. I have tons of resources I share, podcasts I've done that are there as well. I also have a YouTube channel under that name. And one thing I want to share there is we talked about ways to support kids in the transitions. And so there I had created a video for my kids when I was going through, because part of it is, as we talked about, is reducing their anxiety. And I had a hard time finding mental health professionals that could work with my kids, because one of them was nonverbal and really couldn't sit through a counseling session. So there I have a video, for example, on creating a social story as one way to prepare children who may be neurodiverse in terms of what to expect in a divorce.
Terrific. Wonderful. So make sure you check out her resources. We'll include all those links below in the show notes. And I'm just curious, Mary Ann, what's one piece of advice you wish every parent going through a special needs divorce knew?
I would say take your time, don't rush, and to a nod to your podcast name, and be intentional in your divorce. This is not something that we want to do, especially if we're not comfortable with the impact it might have, or not understanding the impact it would have to ourselves and to our kids. So take the time to really understand what's important to you and to your kids and to your future and to their future, so that when you're making decisions in divorce, you're really taking those things into account, as opposed to just trying to get it done and having not considered those things that are really going to impact you going forward.
Good advice. Thank you so much, Mary Ann, for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And for our audience, we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for joining me on Intentional Divorce Insights. It's a privilege to share this time with you. I hope each episode offers valuable guidance to navigate your journey. If you find our content helpful, please leave a review to help others discover the benefits of intentional decision-making in divorce. Until next time, take care and continue to embrace your path with intention.